Hello and welcome to this first in a series of videos and podcasts from the Stay at Home Choir, At Home With. My name's Tori Longdon and I'm a conductor and workshop leader from London, and together with Jamie Wright from the Swingle Singers we have formed the Stay at Home Choir, which is a 6-week-old global community of musicians who are coming together to try and find a new way to have a sense of community and to make music. Born out of lockdown, which is the situation we're all in at the moment as I'm talking to you in April 2020. But increasingly our singers are finding that it's a great opportunity to interact with artists and composers and groups that they know and love, even if they might live on a different continent. So it's the end of the day here and I'm just waiting for Sir James MacMillan to join me in my Zoom room for a chat about the piece which we've been working on recently with the Stay at Home Choir, O Radiant Dawn. So I'm just going to keep an eye out for him and I'll let you know when he joins us. O Radiant Dawn is a lovely motet. It's short, it's relatively easy, though it does have its challenges. It's about 2.5 minutes long, just in 4 parts. And it's from James's Strathclyde motets, which if you don't know, I'd encourage you to check them out. They're really, really lovely. And he's actually just arrived. So without further ado, I will add him in and we'll get cracking. Hello, James.
Hello, nice to be with you.
Nice to be with you too. And you're coming all the way from sunny Ayrshire, is that right?
That's right, I live in North Ayrshire, out in the countryside.
Great. And so whereabouts is that for people who don't necessarily know Scotland? Whereabouts are you?
Yes, well, the nearest big town, I suppose, is Glasgow. I've lived many years in Glasgow, but about 4 years ago we moved out to the countryside. I'm not too far away from the big city, it's about an hour's drive, but more importantly, it's only 40 minutes to the airport, and that was a consideration when we moved here. But it's very much out in the countryside now. I'm not near it. We're 3 miles from the nearest little town of Largs. We have no neighbours apart from some sheep and some roe deer. It's very conducive for my work. It's a very helpful place to be. It's quiet. I can get a lot done here.
Great. So it must be quite a peaceful lockdown for you then.
It is, yes. And in some senses, there hasn't been very much difference to normal life. I have a mixture of things that I do in my work. I work here. The most important thing is working here and writing music here. But I'm a jobbing musician as well. I travel and conduct, and I have one foot in academia. But all that has stopped, of course, just in the same way as it's come to an end for all working musicians. I'm lucky, I suppose, in the sense that I can return more directly to the day job, which is sitting here and working in my music. And I've noticed that the composition of my work has speeded up. I've become very productive, certainly since the new year, but most certainly in the last 4 or 5 weeks.
That's amazing, because I mean, normally, you must be hot-footing it all over the globe. Is it unusual? Is it nice to be able to be spending much more time in your own home?
Yes, I'm not as globe-trotting as some of my colleagues. I was speaking and seeing some of our colleagues from the 16 yesterday, and they travel much more than I do. And I'm much more cautious about the work that I take on. However, I am used to traveling. Before the lockdown happened, I was in Russia, and before that, I've been conducting in the States and in places in Europe and so on, mainland Europe, and all that has changed, and maybe it will come back eventually. We're kind of half hoping that will be the case.
Well, we can hope so, yeah. Well, we've got members from the Stay at Home Choir in the States and in Russia, and so maybe they can keep an eye out for the next time that you might be with us. Cheers, by the way. What's that? Is that a glass of Coke that I see?
I'm afraid it is.
That's wonderful. It's nice to have a chance to chat at the end of a day. You mentioned the 16, and of course we've been working quite closely with the 16 for this last project with the Stay at Home Choir. But it's a group that you have a very long and involved relationship with. So I was just wondering how you work with them, how you bear in mind your sort of rich understanding of their sound when you're
Mm.
composing your music.
Well, it's a relationship that started maybe about 15 or 16 years ago when Harry Christophers invited me to write a piece of music for them. The first piece I wrote for the 16 was a setting of the O Bone Jesu text, which is a medieval sacred text. And uh, it really worked very well. The synergy, myself and Harry and the singers worked very well. I knew many of the singers because I had seen them in other choirs. But Harry was just beginning to turn his mind to contemporary composers. Obviously, the 16 is very much more associated with earlier music. And the development of the 16's commitment to contemporary music is a relatively recent thing, but I think I was there at the beginning of it, and maybe I helped persuade Harry to turn his mind towards the living composer. I'd like to think that, and he's certainly worked with many composers since. And so over the years since O Bone Jesu, Harry has asked me to write a number of different things. The next one was a setting of the Miserere. A few years later, a piece that's now about 10 years old, and they sing it beautifully, and they've recorded it. It's also a work that seems to have entered the repertoire, and many choirs, both professional and amateur, now sing it, which is great. And then gradually other pieces emerged, a setting of the O Virgo Prudentissima, and then the largest pieces to date have been a setting of the Stabat Mater, for choir and string orchestra, and more recently my Fifth Symphony, which is the 16 Genesis 16, which is the training academy and orchestra. Both pieces have been recorded, and rather famously and rather lovely, a lovely memory was that the Stabat Mater went to the Sistine Chapel in Rome as one of the performances, again given by Harry, the 16 and the Britain Sinfonia a few years ago.
Great. And I was very lucky to be in the audience at the Barbican for the premiere of Le Chant d'Inconnu earlier on. Was it October?
Yes.
Yeah, and it was really interesting to hear you in conversation before that, and then taking some questions from the audience as well. And thank you so much for doing the little Q&A during our webinar as well with our members. Do you find that you have a lot of conversations with your fans and people who love your music? Do you get lots of contact from people?
Yes, I think so. And you mentioned the pre-concert talk. These happen a lot, and I like it. I mean, I love talking about music. I like communicating about music. I write about music as well. It's something that I think is very important. If you have a love of music and want to share that enthusiasm and bring new people into it, especially new music, where there's sometimes a reticence from some people in the classical music audience who may not know enough about it, or may think that it might be rather forbidding or esoteric in some way, and to be able to reach out and bring them in any way, through talking about it and in dialogue, is a very helpful thing to do.
Yeah, because I mean, some people feel like the composer is a sort of untouchable god of music, and actually, as I wonder if interesting things can come out of having those conversations with other people that then spur you on in a different creative direction.
I think so, and I think for an audience member maybe coming along cold to a pre-concert talk, it's a wonderful way into the piece of music you're about to hear. It provides an insight, an added understanding, I think, and I think it's important for composers as well to have those encounters, whether they're public like that, or even just in private conversation with people. People write to me about my music. I got a letter today from someone who had been in the audience for the first performance of Le Grand Inconnu in Edinburgh, which was at the Edinburgh Festival in August. And it was wonderful to hear from her and to see and to read her thoughts about the music. And that happens a lot. You know, people will write and say things about your music and ask questions about the music. And it just shows you there's a big community out there, and maybe even an untapped community, a community still to be drawn in to the world of contemporary music.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. So speaking of drawing people into the world of contemporary music, if people want to take your music and perform it, maybe introduce it to their choir master, or maybe in an orchestral setting, perform it there, how can we get hold of it? How do people find out what to play? How do people discover new music?
Okay, well, what I would suggest is go directly to the publisher's website. And I happen to be published by Boosey and Hawkes. So it's a great publishing firm. Not only have they a marvellous history and reputation, but they have a wonderful staff. People who look after me, people who promote the music, who publicize the music, get the music out, who hire the music, sell the music. But also in the promotion department, there are people there that I can speak with about planning my way ahead and what I should do next. And I take a lot of advice from them as well. So music publishers can do an awful lot more than maybe the public understand. They work very closely like editors almost with their composers, and it's a relationship that certainly worked very well for me. But that would be where to go online, go to the Boosey and Hawkes website. All my music is listed there under the usual headings. If you wanted the choral music, there's a choral music section. There's a section for chamber music, for orchestral music, for vocal music. You can explore it according to genre. And the interesting thing with Boosey and Hawkes is that they've actually graded my choral music according to difficulty, because the choral world is a fabulous world out there. It's not just the great professional choirs like the 16 or Tenebrae or the BBC Singers. There's a huge worldwide ecology of choral singers and people who sing in their local choirs, and they want access to this music too. And so Boosey and Hawkes have graded my choral music levels 1 to 5 according to difficulty. So level 1 is the easiest, theoretically, and level 5 is the most difficult. So I suppose some of the pieces I've been talking about, like the Stabat Mater and Le Grand Inconnu, would probably come in at level 4 or 5. But I've been very keen, as I've built up this relationship with that choral world, that I should produce a body of work that is accessible to all. And this little piece, O Radiant Dawn, that the stay-at-home choir is working on just now with the 16, I wrote that initially for my little group of volunteers at a church in Glasgow, where I did the music, and not many of them, there was about 15 of them, not many of them could actually read music, and actually not many of them had sung much before they started working with me. So I had to, in a sense, shape the music to suit the abilities of the choir, and I've done that in a number of ways. There's a body of work now, principally my Strathclyde motets. So if someone went to the Boosey and Hawkes website and searched out the Strathclyde motets, they were specially written for a good amateur student choir at Strathclyde University, mostly, or some of them were written for my little group of volunteers. So some are very, very easy, and some are a little bit more difficult, but certainly levels 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, very accessible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you were saying about the ecology of choirs that are all around. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your choir that you wrote O Radiant Dawn for. Now, for those of you who are watching this interview who are not taking part in the Stay at Home Choirs project at the moment, the piece that we're singing is one James has just mentioned, which is O Radiant Dawn. And it's a lovely, tiny little motet. It's only 3 pages long. It rates as, I think it's number 1, is it, on the difficulty scale from Boosey?
Level 1, I think. Yeah.
It's so it's so effective, but it's so accessible for different choirs of all abilities, right up to the professional standard like the 16. So when you first introduced that piece to your voluntary choir, what was the reaction? How did they cope with it? How did you teach it to them?
Well, there was a lot of note bashing. I had to go through each part very, very meticulously and keep doing it for a number of weeks, actually.
Yeah.
But eventually they got there, and as I was saying to the stay-at-home choir, although it's level 1 in difficulty, there are actually some challenges in our work. Any unaccompanied piece of choral music is a challenge for singers who are maybe not as experienced in singing unaccompanied music. Trying to hold pitch, even in a short piece of 3 minutes, is a huge challenge, and so you've got to really work at that. How do you help amateur singers maintain pitch? It's something that choral directors think about all the time, all
It'll
over
be
the
over a
world, of
second
course.
glass of wine, that one.
Yes, that's right. But eventually we got there, and as I say, my choir. I don't live in Glasgow anymore, but so I don't do that choir anymore. But it was a mixture of rank amateurs, people starting right from the beginning, but also some helpful students, including a couple of my children, who, when they weren't there, it was more difficult because the student singers are able to hold the line, but when they disappear during term time, for example, it becomes more of a more pressure on the others. But it's something I love doing. It was hard work. I did it for 10 years. But I love amateur choirs. I've always valued the role of the amateur choir, whether it's in this country or in other countries. They're so essential, so important to the world of music. And speaking about British choirs and the British choral dimension, all the great orchestral choruses are amateur choristers. They're volunteers who have jobs and then come together with people like Simon Halsey and so on for evening rehearsals. But they've got to raise their game up to the level of the London Symphony Orchestra, because that's who they're going to be performing Belshazzar's Feast or the Verdi Requiem with. So I think that's a marvellous thing, so that the people that are amateur and maybe do music in their spare time nevertheless come together in these circumstances, raise their game and produce music at the highest possible level. And that happens all over the world, of course. So if there are Americans and Australians and people in Holland watching, they will know that happens in their countries as well.
Yeah, and actually, if you're watching this and you are one of those choirs, post it in the comments below. Let's see how wide our reach is and where you're coming from, because everybody's part of this global community of singers. But James, you were telling me earlier on that there's so much going on right around you. Even though you're in the Scottish countryside with nobody for miles around, there's still a really deep musical tradition within your local area. Is that right?
Yes, very much so. I grew up here in Ayrshire. I was born in Ayrshire and went to school here, and my family are from here. And I moved back here about 4 or 5 years ago. I decided to set up a little festival of my own about 7 years ago. There is, as you're aware, a kind of tradition of composer-led festivals in the United Kingdom, the most famous one being at Aldeburgh, which was set up in the late 1940s by Benjamin Britten. And then Peter Maxwell Davies did something similar in the 1970s when he set up his St Magnus Festival up in the Orkney Islands where he lived. And I always wondered whether I would do something similar myself. And the time came when, or the time was right for me to do it. And I decided to set it up in the little town where I had grown up as a boy, a town called Cumnock, which is about 30 miles from here. It's sort of South Ayrshire. This is North Ayrshire. And I remember it being a very musical place when I was young. It's where I became a musician, where I wanted to become a musician, where I made music initially with friends and relatives and teachers and sang in the choir at school. And it was the right place to establish a little festival. It's a tiny little thing, but it's had some great success over the years, and we've brought some fabulous musicians to perform there, including the 16 and the King Singers and the Choir of Westminster Cathedral. We're talking to some wonderful performers about the forthcoming festivals whenever we get back to normal, or whatever normality might be like then. And the ethos of the festival is that these great musicians come, and Nicola Benedetti is our patron, and she's performed, and but they work closely with the people in the town who are not just there as audience, but actually have a sense of ownership. They're volunteers. We've set up a volunteer chorus who now perform at a very high level, conducted by Amy Dugan, who's one of the 16, of course, and one of the great choral trainers in the country now. And our chorus love him, and already they've performed Mozart and Fauré, and I've written for them. So I'm very excited about that festival. We've achieved a lot in 6 or 7 years, and we have big plans for the future. And I'd like to extend an invitation to all those people who are listening and watching this, that if you're ever in Scotland, and especially in Ayrshire, East Ayrshire, in the years to come, remember us, think about us in early October, because that's when our festival is. You'll be very welcome. It's a tiny little town, but we'll find you a place to stay, and there are lots of other towns nearby. Those of you who don't know the geography, the other towns nearby are Ayr and Kilmarnock, and as I say, we're not too far from Glasgow.
It sounds absolutely beautiful, and it just goes to show, doesn't it? That wherever you are in the world, there is so much to get involved with, both at a local level, and then, you know, now digitally we can reach out to all sorts of people all over the world and join together with what they've got going on in their local area as well. So it's maybe there's a silver lining here somewhere for connecting all of these little micro communities of music makers all over the world.
I was just thinking about this today. In fact, one of our big plans at the Cumnock Tryst is to build up a kind of community opera from scratch, so that the people in different groups, whether the local choirs, local bands, local little groups of musicians, are guest composers, but also people who have a background in dramaturgy and theatre, and help them to make their own piece of music theatre. We call it an opera, but it might be something different. And gradually we'll build it up from scratch into something very wonderful, I hope, and very local. But now that we've got all this technology, it might not just be local people that could be involved in it. It could be open to people from around Britain, around Europe, around the world, who might in some way be able to take part in building a new community opera for the Cumnock Tryst.
Yeah, well, there's something at least there to look forward to when we emerge from this period of lockdown. James, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. It's so exciting to hear about everything you've got going on, even in this quieter time. It sounds like you're still keeping very busy.
Yes, absolutely. It's been a very fertile time for me, and I in that sense, I wake up in the morning full of ideas, and I think many composers are like that. And I sometimes wish we could share that sense of excitement with people who are not composers. I mean, this is what we do. Social isolation is our world, it's our life. It's a very necessary solitude. Yeah. But the beautiful thing about it is that what I do in this room, and what composers like me do in rooms like this, is that we make music that will eventually be shared by our fellows one way or another. We'll give it to our fellow musicians, who will then perform it for the entertainment or the nourishment of the musical public.
Yeah, I think you already are providing such an amazing, uplifting service to people who are taking part in the stay-at-home choir. You know, to hear you talk about your music is so exciting, and we can't wait to see all of the results of this quiet period that you've had sitting in your beautiful studio composing in beautiful Scotland. So thank you so much for talking to me, and I'll let you get back to it. And we can't wait to see the results.
You're very welcome, and thank you very much. And good luck, everyone out there.
Thank you so much. Bye, James.
Bye-bye.